አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔም ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch አደባባይ ሚዲያ?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome everyone to Adebabay Media's Viewer Digest program. My name is EOTC and I'll be your host for today. This week is a week where we commemorate the countrymen and women, our countrymen and women who have defeated the Italians and defended Ethiopia from colonization and gave us and afforded us the freedom that we're enjoying today. This week on Adwa Media, starting from today, we'll be covering this amazing event that our ancestors were able to pass down for us. And starting today, our guest is historian Haile Mekbib Haile, apologies. And we'd like everyone to share and like this conversation and stay with us.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
125 years ago, on March 1st, Ethiopians defeated the well-armed Italian army in the northern town of Adwa. Today, we have invited author and historian Mekbib Haile Mekuria to talk to us about what Ethiopia looked like in that era, the preparation and the road to Adwa, and also the impact the victory had on us as Ethiopians and also in the world history. We have come today to ambitiously cover 200 years of history in this very short program. Thank you so much, Professor Mekbib, for being here with us and for having this conversation with us as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great opportunity actually to have this opportunity on Adebabay Media to say a few things about what our ancestors accomplished in that really highly decisive moment in history. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And for those of you that may have missed his previous conversation in the Amharic program as well, we'll be able to link that for you after this conversation is over. So he's definitely one of our historical fathers within Adwa Media. So thank you again for being here with us. So like I said in the introduction, we are ambitiously trying to cover about 200 years of Ethiopian history leading up to Adwa and also what the Adwa, the victory itself, looked like. So let us start with, can you give us a bit of introduction about what Ethiopia looked like as socially and politically, and where we could start looking at the first consequence or the impact of how the Adwa battle came about?
Well, this is the 19th century, second half of the 19th century, when Ethiopia was just coming out of, the time, what we generally call Zemene Mesafint, and trying to organize and catch up with what we call modernization. And the early modern period of Ethiopian history generally begins from 1855 with the end of Zemene Mesafint, and that is the coming of Theodorus to power. And this period was again another time of great historical moment, meaning that the whole of Africa was under the threat of colonization by European powers. And the Europeans have actually made a point to colonize the whole of Africa and leave no one actually untouched. A great event had taken place before the Battle of Adwa, because Europeans have already established themselves the coastal areas of the whole continent, and they were leading colonization or inland occupation of the continent of Africa. Now, our region, that is North and Northeastern Africa, had been under great powers from the early period. Now, the time when colonization started, North Africa had been under the Ottoman rule. That means from Morocco in the northwest, all the way through what is today Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, the Sudan, and of course, the coastal areas of Ethiopia and the Red Sea had been under the influence of the Ottoman power. And therefore, who was Italy in this period? How did Italy happen to be here? Was actually another very important point we have to consider. With the decline of the Ottoman power, beginning from the early part of the 19th century, Europeans started actually encroaching in the borders of North Africa. 1805 was the time when Muhammad Ali came to power in Egypt. Muhammad Ali is known as the modernizer of Egypt, and he was sent there as a viceroy of the Ottoman Turks, replacing the Mamluks, who were the former rulers of Egypt itself. Then, what happened? Europeans were also interested in occupying this key position. That means Egypt, and it's between Asia on the east and the western areas you see in the from Egypt onward, westward. Therefore, Britain and France were actually paying great attention to this area. What would happen if the Ottoman power is to win out, and who would be there actually taking control of the region? Following the French Revolution, that was in 1789, Napoleon Bonaparte was sent out from France to Eastern Mediterranean with a naval force. And the British were following this very closely. And they discovered that the French were intending or actually to do something somewhere in this area. Then they discovered that Napoleon had landed in Egypt and was leading invasion, right, of the Egyptian territories. Well, luckily, Nelson sneaked in at night and destroyed the French fleet in the port of Alexandria. And then this had actually checked the French occupation of Egypt. Well, one way or the other, we see European involvement in the region now beginning from this time. That was 1897. In 1897, the French and the British are already actually coming into the Egyptian territory. Following this, well, Muhammad Ali, who was the ruler of Egypt beginning from 1805 to 1849, had acted as a modernizer of Egypt. Muhammad Ali declared himself independent from the Ottoman power, the Ottoman Sultan, and created Egypt.
Did he actually come from the Ottomans first before he declared? Okay.
Yeah. Now he was sent there by the Ottoman Sultan.
Okay.
Then he declared himself independent from the Ottomans and became the sole ruler of Egypt. Now, the British, who somehow seem to be more concerned for the interest of the Ottoman Sultan, approached the Ottoman Sultan and actually wanted to do something against Muhammad Ali. Thus, they got access into Egypt. All right, they got access into Egypt. On the other hand, what they did, as if they have done nothing against him, they approached Muhammad Ali and tried to assist him, give him support in all his programs because he was a modernizer. And thus, they provided him with all facilities, loan, and opening the schools, training, the army, and so on and so forth. Thus, Muhammad Ali, or encouraged by the British, started expanding Egyptian territories into the Sudan. Thus, he managed actually to occupy the Sudan from 1819 to 1923. The whole of the Sudan was occupied. Thus, Egypt is now a neighbor, direct, immediate neighbor of Ethiopia. All right? And now we have Egyptian interest in this. Now, Egyptian interest did not end with the occupation of the Sudan because it has other plans. Because, the River Nile is a major factor for the major factor. And the Egyptians were trying to control not only the Sudan, but the source of the Nile. And therefore, Muhammad Ali's intention was also focused on the eastern side of Ethiopia, that is the Red Sea regions and Saudi Arabia. And 1819, they were already in Saudi Arabia, and they were controlling this. That means they were strong enough actually to take over the Ottoman territories. And then, little by little, they started actually establishing themselves along, the eastern Red Sea areas in Ethiopia. And then we have, this Egyptian, all right, Egyptian sovereignty in the region.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about Italy? How did Italy happen to be there? Okay.
Yeah.
Now we are coming to the second half of the 19th century. Europeans had already made their mind, right, to do something about Africa. Because Africa was the only area which was not colonized, until the 19th century. Therefore, they had a meeting in Berlin. Now, that was in 1884, 85. Now, the meeting started in November 15 and actually lasted for 4 months until February 26. And in this meeting, the Europeans decided to formally colonize Africa. And they set a law, how to go about it, right?
Is this what we know as the Berlin Agreement?
Berlin Conference, or sometimes also known as the Congo Conference. Right?
Okay.
Congo Conference. Then they made agreement among themselves. Any European power wishing to colonize Africa, right, has to come up, all right, with some justification. And that justification is meant by actually creating a sphere of influence along the African coastal areas, which would permit or allow Europeans to expand inland and over territories, all right, as far inland as possible until they meet any other European expansion from the other direction. Now, this was made a law among themselves. Therefore, to show that someone has the right to expand inland from a certain territory has to show some form of agreement between the Italians or Europeans or the French or the Germans with the local chiefs, right? It was this agreement actually which led to what we call the Wuchari Treaty on the Italian side. On the other hand, Europeans have this. On the other side, the African chiefs actually do not know anything about actually what was going on, all right, in Africa. On the other hand, it is said that the Europeans were assisted by the local chiefs themselves, right? The local chiefs themselves, without knowing or without understanding, those Europeans were either colonizers or traders. If you take the Wuchale Treaty, it was a trade agreement between the Italians and the Ethiopians. Or Menelik's understanding was that Italy is more interested in establishing trade relations. All right? He did not have the slightest idea that Italy was to colonize Africa based on this agreement. As soon as Menelik understood this, he immediately abrogated the treaty in 1894 and sent what is known as an official letter to all European forces, European powers like Britain, France, Germany, and so on and so on. Therefore, the Wuchale Treaty, from the Menelik's point of view, is not the cause for the Battle of Adwa. Actually, the Battle of Adwa was fought between Italy, from my point of view, not because of the Wuchale Treaty, but the Wuchale Treaty was simply an excuse. And that was abrogated by Menelik. It was not recognized by Menelik as, Italy to be the colonizer of Ethiopia. This is actually how we understand, because first of all, how did the Europeans happen to be in Ethiopia to lead an invasion and attempt to colonize the country?
So how did Italy end up in East Africa, specifically in Ethiopia? Because at that time, right, during that time, they were in Somali, and as well as in the Eritrean Ethiopian borders. How did they get there?
Well, this is a very interesting question. To establish a sphere of influence, first of all, you have to come up with some form of agreement between the European power and a local chief, right? It was an Italian company which bought the port of a small area, a small territory in Assad, just a company, and that land bought by the company was passed over to the Italian government, and the Italian government now started claiming legitimacy in the region. Little by little, the Italians were expanding northward until 1885. In 1885, there was another incident in the region, which actually, facilitated for the Italians actually, to come into the territories. Now, what was this incident? Beginning from 1883, the Sudan, which was occupied by Egypt, was liberated by the Mahdist movement. But what was this Mahdist movement? The Egyptians were the rulers of Egypt beginning from the times of Muhammad Ali. That is 1819 to 23. And actually the Egyptian rule of the Sudan, as we learn from history, was actually stated as to be, the worst form of government on earth. Now, this is, I'm very sorry actually to state this, because this is actually what we read. The worst form of government, because the British, right, the worst form in 19 had occupied the Sudan of Egypt, colonized Egypt in 1882, 83, and then also led their occupation of the Sudan, right? And then they introduced what is known as the indirect rule. Indirect rule. The British were not directly involved there. All right, they have brought in Europeans, foreigners into the Sudan, who would serve as actually, the upper class. And then the Egyptians, who were the rulers of Egypt, were driven down to the second class. And then below that, you have, the Sudanese. And the Sudanese were treated, very, very harshly. They were not even allowed actually to use the Nile water for irrigation, for anything. Actually, they were supposed actually to supply workforce, right? And most of the families in the Sudan had to actually give away, their property in the form of a taxation. They were paying, 3 or 4 types of taxation for the upper, right, rulers, the British, then the Egyptians, and the foreigners who were ruling in Egypt, in the Sudan.
Yeah.
And because of this, the Egyptians, the Sudanese were harshly treated, and they were actually, looking for someone who would come and, salvage them from this. And it so happened that in 1883, a certain Muhammad Ahmed, who is known as, the Dongolawi or the Mahdi al-Muntazir, all right, came in. Now, the Mahdi al-Muntazir, the meaning of this means the expected guide who would salvage the Sudan from the colonial powers. Therefore, the Mahdi forces liberated most of the Sudan and finally drove out the Egyptian forces from the Sudan and actually led them to the borders of Ethiopia. And there was no outlet for them, to escape. And this incident brought Egyptian, all right, Egyptian or British were the rulers, and the Ethiopians, all right, together.
Yeah.
The Egyptian, the British rulers of Egypt and the Sudan.
So when they were being driven out of Sudan, they were fleeing towards Ethiopia. Is that what happened?
Yeah, the Egyptian forces led to the borders of Ethiopia, and they couldn't get access actually to the from this area to the port. All right, they couldn't get access because this territory in between you have Ethiopian territory.
Yeah.
All right. What happened was, now the British sent a delegation to Johannes at the time. Now Johannes became the king beginning from 1882 to 1889. And in this period, there was an attempt, right, by the British to find a way out of this, a corridor through Ethiopia to the port of Massawa, right?
Yeah.
And that was achieved. And there was an agreement. Massawa had been under the Egyptian rule. Now, when this, all right, agreement was signed, Massawa was to be given back to Johannes, and Johannes was to use this port as, a free port for, right, for trade or for any other purpose. But in the meantime, now Johannes understood this, but in the meantime, the Italians had approached the British to allow them actually not to come into Massawa. And that was in 1885. Immediately after, the Egyptian forces left the region, all right, the region, the port, they were replaced, you can say this, replaced in Massawa, all right? Now, the Egyptians have left, and now the Italians have moved in. Now, meaning what? They have a direct claim there.
Yeah.
And the agreement between the British and Johannes was not there anymore. And yeah, why? Because the British were claiming actually, the affairs in the areas, right? And therefore, now we have Italy in Massawa from 1885 onward. Then Italy started moving inland from Massawa. And then we have what we call, actually, in this incident, Ethiopia had to defend the withdrawing Egyptian forces from the Sudan. And that actually led into a bloody war between Ethiopia and the Mahdiist forces, right, in Galabat and in Kofit. Actually, that battle was led by Alula Ngida, right? Well, you know about Alula Ngida, right? And another confrontation now on the east. When the Italians were moving in, Alula was responsible, for the affairs of Eritrea. And then he found the Italians, coming inland, ambushed them in the Battle of Dogali, and massacred 500 Italians, right, in a night attack. And therefore, now this is actually the situation where now Italians wanted to revenge this, right? And yeah, and now we have, Italians confronting against the Ethiopians, right? And who was actually managing this? The British on the other hand, because they were the British who were supposed actually, to turn in Massawa to Johannes. But indirectly, they brought in the Italians. And therefore, the Italians have their own interest. Now, history actually understands this as why the British brought in the Italians. The British, according to most historians, right, accepted Italy or brought in Italy into Massawa to serve as a watchdog for what was going on in the Sudan. All right? Yeah, in the Sudan, because they have already tested, a bitterness, in the Mahdist struggle. They have lost a huge force. One of those forces was the Higgs Expedition. You see, with about 35,000 soldiers now sent to Western Sudan, northwestern Sudan, and not even a single life was lost or was saved. All were massacred by the Mahdist forces. That 35,000 British-led forces confronted 90,000 Mahdist fighters, and all of them were finished. They knew this. The other thing was the days of General Gordon Pasha. Gordon Pasha was a former ruler of the Sudan, and now when the Mahdist forces started, attacking, right, the areas and drove out the Egyptians, the British thought that he knew the region, he knew the area, and therefore he could, easily, right, pull out, the foreigners and other Europeans, from the area. But Gordon Pasha had a wrong understanding about, the strengths and the move of the Mahdist forces. He stayed in Khartoum, right, instead of actually, withdrawing from the area. And therefore, he himself was killed in Khartoum. Therefore, the British had bitterness. That's actually why I say, therefore, they brought in the Italians to serve them as a watchdog, in the area. All right. And therefore, the affairs of the Sudan was abandoned until 1896. Until 1896. And now this 1896 was the date when the Battle of Adwa was fought. And, right, then they started actually the reconquest of the Sudan. Okay.
Sounds good. We'll take a quick break, everyone. So we have just covered just an overview of how Ethiopia was looking like politically and what the territory around Ethiopia is looking like right before the Adwa battle started. When we come back, we'll talk a bit about how Minilik ended up being the king that led this war against Italy, and that relationship that he built with people in the northern part of Ethiopia, as well as that strength that he was able to accumulate about 100,000 warriors to defend Ethiopia. So we'll be right back. In the meantime, please continue to share and like this conversation so everybody can be able to participate in this conversation, as well as continue to think of questions that you may have. You can ask our professor when we are wrapping up this conversation, and we'll be right back.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Welcome back, everyone. We're having a conversation about the Battle of Adwa and the events that led up to that as well. Professor, now that we have established what was going on around Ethiopia at that time, we know that by the time the Mahdists were pushing the Egyptians, or the England Egyptians, out of Sudan, Minilik was still just a king in the Showa. So how does that come about that he became the king of kings and was able to lead this army to Adwa? Who is Minilik? Where did it come from?
Well, it's really surprising how Minilik happened to be there. It's really surprising. Who was Minilik after all? We find Minilik in 1855 when Theodorus marched on Shah. Right? 1855 was the time when Theodorus became the king. And then he got the submission of Tigray, then Gojam, and finally he came to Shah. Now, before his arrival in Showa, the Shawans knew that, he was coming, and therefore they have to defend, all right, Showa from, submission. Therefore, it was Minilik's father, Haile Melekot, who was responsible at this time, Haile Melekot, who led forces into Wollo, not thinking that, he had to keep Theodorus, right, from crossing, the Bashilo River, right? The Bashilo River. Therefore, he went there, and he had to wait there, for a long time. And Theodorus was delayed. He didn't come. And therefore, it was actually rainy season. He returned home, and unfortunately, he was sick and passed away. He died. Then Theodorus was on his way to Showa by that time. All right. When Theodorus led his forces into Showa, right? Other officers tried not to defend. People like Mashashasif and his forces had fought against Theodorus, but Theodorus was well experienced in a huge army, and therefore, he could very easily defeat the forces, Showan forces. Now there was actually a kind of a meeting on what to do about the future. Then they couldn't agree actually what to do. Some said, let us just retreat to the south and continue fighting, and others said, no, we have to hand in Menelik and submit to Theodorus. Therefore, there was no agreement. They couldn't agree on this. Therefore, the case was brought to Menelik. Now, this time he was only 10 years old. And therefore, they couldn't do anything. They told Menelik, about this situation. I continue fighting or submit to Theodorus. Menelik himself decided actually to submit. And he was taken a prisoner.
10-year-old.
Yeah, 10 years old.
Yeah, 10 years old.
Therefore, Shoah was integrated into this empire. And Theodorus' attempt was to re-establish or reset the unity of Ethiopia. The Mene Masafint was the disintegration after the end of the Gondarian period. That was in 1769. Now was the time of the beginning of the Mene Masafint. Until 1885, there was regional chiefs were handling affairs in Ethiopia. There was no centralism. The time was frequented by looting, battles, and there was lawlessness everywhere. And therefore, Theodorus was actually to stop this and try to bring law and order in the country. Law and order. Therefore, Menelik now was taken a prisoner to Magdala, and he stayed there, until 1865. Now the period of 10 years. But in this period, actually, Theodorus had high regard for Menelik. Or we can say he liked him very much. And you know what he did? He even gave his daughter, Alekash Theodorus, for a wife to Menelik. So yeah. On the other hand, this marriage of Tawarich to Menelik was actually suspected. Actually, why was Theodorus interested in giving his daughter marriage to Menelik? Now, she was there, according to some sources, only to watch on actually what Menelik and his group were doing or thinking about, about Theodorus and his
So to
group.
spy.
Yeah. And therefore, Menelik was not, and his group were not actually, comfortable. They were not comfortable. And therefore, escape from this, from Magdala.
I'm having a bit of an issue hearing you, Professor.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, now it's good. Continue.
Okay.
Yep.
And now they were arranging this, they were plotting this, and they included, other forces, not only in Mekbela, but in the Wollo areas, who would actually, facilitate, the escape, to Shoah. And then there was Muhammad Ali, actually later became, the Speaker of Wollo. Then Warkit and Mastite, those were regional chiefs in Wollo areas. And they cooperated, with this escape. And therefore, Menelik managed to escape from Magdala in 1865 and came back to Shoah. Well, as he came to Shoah,
when he escaped from there, did he bring his wife along, or did he leave her there?
He left because, as I told you, there was this suspicion, and he did not even disclose his ideas to her.
Oh, okay.
He left her behind, and therefore they managed to get away. Now, once he came to Shoah, Menelik confronted Bezabir, who was actually appointed as the ruler of Shoah. All right, this is the first problem actually Menelik confronted there in Shoah. There was a battle fought between Bezabir and Theodorus and Menelik at Gadilo. Now, this was the place where the battle took place. Bezabir was taken a prisoner, and finally was sentenced actually to death. In Ethiopian tradition, to commemorate this, they say, "Antem ጨካኝ ነበር, ጨካኝ አዘዘብህ፣ እንደገና ደግሞ እሳት ነደደብን. And he was sentenced actually to be burnt alive.
Wow.
Yeah, that was actually how Bazabu came, right?
Yeah.
Then after this, now Menelik started consolidating his power in Shaw. He started, relations with various local chiefs and started organizing his force, his power. Then in 1869, 68, Theodorus were committed suicide because of Napier expedition. Now, I don't have to go into that. Well, if I have to, well, there was Napier expedition.
Yeah, we'll get back to that another time for sure.
Okay. And yeah, um, he knew that he was the only person actually who has, direct claim to the throne, and therefore entitled himself Lukusanegist. Right? On the days of Theodorus, he claimed himself to be Lukusanegist of Ethiopia. Now, after Theodorus, we have Teklegiotis, right, for 4 years, from 68 to 72. And then in 72, we have Johannes taking over power. Johannes came to power. Now, like Theodorus, Johannes also wanted actually, to confirm that he's in control of all regions. And therefore, he led forces. And finally, he came to show. Now, this is actually where we learn more about, the characters of Menelik, the wisdom of Menelik. Now, when Johannes came, Menelik had to weigh, between, both. And then finally, he decided to submit peacefully. He submitted at Luchi. Actually, he went there. He told Johannes that he's no more Luxembourgist, right? And then he submitted to him. And therefore, Johannes.
I had a question on this. Did he submit to Johannes because he didn't have the army power, or was he not comfortable with the loss of his people that will follow along if he went to war with Johannes?
Now, this time, Menelik's understanding was actually confronting any force. This time is not wise, really. Why? Because Ethiopia was facing problems, from all directions. Internal conflict actually would do harm, to this. And therefore, instead, keep on consolidating power, all right? And then if there is any problem, cooperate, with the local chief or with Johannes, all right? And avoid direct confrontation against each other. The only problem we have there is in this territorial claim or expansions, to the various regions, where we have Takal Haymanut and Menelik to fight the Battle of Mbabu. Yeah, that's the only incident. Otherwise, Menelik was so careful, all right, to avoid any confrontation and actually, waste energy and power. Therefore, he peacefully submitted and actually became a very, very good ally to Johannes. Very good ally, right? He submitted to Johannes. He was so loyal to him, and therefore, he simply carried on, his program of strengthening himself, right? And trying actually, to watch on actually what's going on around Ethiopia. When he was in Magdala, he had learned that Ethiopia had fought about 10 wars, all right, in about 10 years period, right? 10 terrible wars on the border areas of Ethiopia. On the western side against the Mahdists, a number of wars. On the eastern side, all right, against Italy, all right, the battle, and then the Egyptians, and then we have there actually the battle of Gura and Gundet, and then
against Egyptians.
That is the Egyptians. Then we have the Italian, where Ras Alula massacred about 500 Italians,
Yeah.
And on the Western Front, where Adullah himself fought against the Mahdists in Kufit, right, and Galabat. And then on the Western side, we have the Battle of Gutedili and Saruha, where, they had to fight against, defend Ethiopia against, the Mahdist incursions. All right. Therefore, many people know about all this. And therefore, the danger is from outside, not from inside. Therefore, wasting any force, any power here is not really advisable. Therefore, he was avoiding that. Therefore, he peacefully submitted. And, Johannes also understood, the intentions or the attitudes of Menelik, and decided actually to create a kind of, marriage alliance. And therefore, Johannes's son, Arasindase, was married to Zodi to Menelik, actually at the age of 6. She was, yeah. Arasindase was 12 years old, and Zodi was only, 6 years old. They were married, and therefore you see, very amicable relationship between Johannes and Menelik. And at the same time, Johannes also encouraged, all right, Menelik, right, to reorganize regions in the south and southwest, all right, because those territories had been lost during Zaman Masafint, and now this is a period of reorganization. And Johannes also gave, a chance for Tekle Haimanot, who was king of Gojam at the time. Now he entitled himself as king of Gojam and Kaffa, the region far to the south. And actually, it was in this, situation that Tekle Haimanot and Menelik had to fight in the battle of Mbabu.
Yeah.
Now that's it. Now, therefore, Menelik was now trying, to build and consolidate his power. All right. Now, on the days of Johannes, that was in 1889, just before the days of Johannes, Menelik, in the attempt actually to get more weapons from outside, was trying, to establish trade link with a European power. Actually, the only European power accessible this time in the region was Italy. Yeah. And Antonelli, now who was an Italian agent, signed this treaty with Menelik. And the agreement, the treaty was written in 2 different languages, in Ethiopic and in Italian. What was written in Ethiopic, right, was different from what is written in Italian. And when the translation took place, actually this treaty was translated by Ato Yosef, right, who translated the treaty. All right, and Yosef discovered that there is something wrong there, and because of this, the Italians were angered and started, saying something bad against, Yosef. Menelik suspected Yosef and put him in prison. It was at this point that we learn more about the wisdom of Taitu. Taitu, on the other hand, was actually investigating, the situation. Why Yosef had to be in prison? Taitu discovered that Yosef had done, the right thing, and therefore he had to be released from prison. All right? Immediately, when Menelik discovered that the Italians were, right, cheating, he immediately abrogated, the Utali Treaty. Immediately abrogated the Utali Treaty. That was in 1890s, and sent a letter to all European forces, powers, Britain, Germany, France, and others, saying that Ethiopia does not have any agreement regarding actually, its relations with European forces through Italy. All right? And therefore, Ethiopia was a sovereign state. And sometimes, people say that, it was the Uchali Treaty which the cause for the Battle of Adwa. No, the Italians were already determined actually not to occupy Ethiopia. All right.
Plus, they've already started the movement before even the treaty has started. So yeah.
Yeah, they were already in. When Johannes was actually fighting in Matamba, the Italians have already moved in because Aduna was not there to defend.
Yeah.
All forces were on the west. And during this time, I'm sorry to say this, some Eritreans in the area, like people like, Matahagos, cooperated with the Italians and actually, led them away until, they reached, the Marab line. Right? Therefore, if Arura was there at the time, he wouldn't allow, the Italians even, to move, a single inch, from it. Yeah. Therefore, now, on the days of Johannes, it was only Menelik who had, potentially very strong, right, potential power, and therefore declared himself as a and immediately started touring, the territories, northern regions, right? He did not stay in Shoa. Then he went to Gojam, then under Tigray, Wollo, and Agaw, all these territories came back, all right? And in Tigray, he confirmed, right, Mengesha Yohannes as, the rightful ruler of Tigray, because there were conflicts there against, Mengesha Yohannes, and therefore Menelik, all right, pacified, the situation.
Yeah.
All right, he came back, and there you see, how Menelik, emerging, emerging, as a potential power in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually how we have it. Yeah.
So once that Johannes had passed, was it then that Menelik, now because he had amassed a lot of relationships and power, that he was able to become King of Kings?
Well, there was no other power actually, to claim this, because Johannes' forces actually fighting in Matama, earlier fighting in Kufit and Galabat, actually forces were exhausted. When somehow, you see, in this period, Italians were trying actually, to create a kind of a wedge between Menelik and Mengesha. And they asked, well, I'm sorry to say this, I'm actually now referring to another very important, document, which is known as the Zamboa Convention, where Italians somehow managed, to ask Mengesha Johannes to sign a treaty, or what is known as the Merv Convention, so that, the Merv would be, the line between, all right, to recognize them as the rulers of Eritrea, right? And therefore, this was actually, something wrong, all right, something wrong, which Mengesha himself realized much later. Now, once he signed this treaty, the Italians started actually pushing him, and therefore he tried actually to stop them, check them there, but he didn't have enough force, right, to defend. He fought in 3 battles where the Italians with superior armament and training and well-trained army, could defeat him easily. Finally, Johannes to come out to tell me that, the territories are in danger. Only then that, we learned that there was, this problem, all right? The Italians occupying, the northern territories, and the agreement signed between them and the Italians. Okay? Now then, the Italians have already crossed in border, crossed the border, and they were in Tigray, and therefore Menelik finally decided actually to lead forces to Anatolia. Yeah. How was it organized? How did he manage to do that? Is also another question. Yeah. And it is there where the personality of Menelik, right, to kind of assist, right? That is it. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you, Professor, again. For those of you that are just joining us, we're having a conversation about the events that led up to the Battle of Adwa. We've established a few territorial issues that Ethiopia was facing right before the Battle of Adwa during Yohannes' time, and 10 different wars Ethiopia was forced to fight within 10 years, 10 battles. That's quite a lot for one country to be able to handle and win every single one of them, correct? So when we come back after a quick break, we will establish how the road to the preparation to the war in Adwa looked like and what the battle itself, how the battle itself was fought. And thank you for joining us. And please continue to like and share this conversation, and we'll be right back.
Adebabay media የኔ ነው Adebabay media የኔም ነው
Adebabay media የኔ ነው
Adebabay media የሁላችንም ነው
የኛ ቤተሰብ Adebabay ሚዲያን ይመለከታል የእናንተስ
Do your parents watch Adebabay media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help Adebabay. Adebabay media ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምብኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ infomedia@gmail.com ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabay.com ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ
Adebabay media የኔ ነው Adebabay media የኔም ነው
Adebabay media የኔ ነው
Adebabay media የሁላችንም ነው
የኛ ቤተሰብ Adebabay ሚዲያን ይመለከታል የእናንተስ
Do your parents watch Adebabay media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help Adebabay. Adebabay media ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ
እንደምን ከረማችሁ እንደምን አላችሁ የእግዚአብሔር አምላክ ስለሰጠን ጊዜ ተመሰገነ ይሁን። ዛሬ እንግዲህ ነነዌን በተመለከተ የቀሲስ አበበን መዝሙር ነነዌን ሊያቃጥል የተላከው እሳት የወረደው እሳት የሚለው መዝሙር እንዘምራለን። ባየነው ተመልሶ አየነው በሐዘን በጸሎት ተመልሶ አየነው ተመልሶ አየነው በሐዘን በጸሎት ለነነዌ ሰዎች ደስታን ያበስር ለነነዌ ሰዎች ደስታን ያበስር ጋሻና ጦራቸው ጋሻና ጦራቸው ጾም ጸሎት ነበረ ጋሻና ጦራቸው ጋሻና ጦራቸው ጾም ጸሎት ነበረ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን እምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራዕያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're having a conversation about the war with Italy, the first war with Italy, with historian Mekbib Haile. And Professor, now that we have established who Minilik was, I think it's only fair to also establish who Eteged Aitu was and how she came to be, because she's played such a huge role in this victory as well.
Well, when we say anything about Minilik, and particularly the Battle of Adwa, well, we shouldn't forget actually, the role played by Tait. Who was Tait? Actually, how did Minilik know about Tait? Actually, Minilik knew about Tait long before, while he was a prisoner in Mekbib. Now, this woman, the Empress Tait later, was visiting her imprisoned brothers in Mekbib. She came there. There, Minilik saw her actually as a young woman, very, very beautiful. And then he asked, his immediate, people there, and others actually to find a way. Actually, he wanted to marry this person. Now those people were in trouble now because Theodros had already, given him, his daughter.
His daughter.
And now he wanted, to marry this other person. And well, Menelik had to insist that, they have to go and at least, ask, the father to allow him to marry. Therefore, they went to Rasmule, Rasmutul, and they asked him actually to allow. When he was willing, except that, he was afraid, for his sons who were in prison there. If Theodros knew about this, you take action, immediate action,
Yeah.
and eliminate all of them. Therefore, that marriage attempt was had to stop until Menelik escaped from Mekbib and came back to Shah.
Sure, yeah.
When Menelik escaped from Shah, his brothers, some of them, have actually followed him. And then Taito also followed them and came to Shah. What was the situation with Menelik in Shah? And as soon as he came to Shah, now there he was married to another woman known as a very, very influential person, Bafana, right?
Mm.
He was married to Bafana. After Magdalena, after he came back to Showa, he married Bafana. But this woman, Bafana, was much older than Mary Kingston, all right? And she married about 4 times, right? Right? And now, actually, he had actually very good, feelings towards Bafana. Unfortunately, Bafana, when Johannes came to power, and Johannes, all right, wanted, to control the regions of Shawa and influence, the regions of Shawa, he wanted to use, the influence of Bafana. And Bafana also had another interest. Instead of actually keeping Minilik as a ruler of Shawa, she wanted to take over power or ask Johannes, to appoint one of her brothers, one of her relatives as a ruler of Shawa. And this plot was actually discovered.
Mm.
Right? And then Menelik was asked actually to just get rid of this person. He was not willing. They had to stay in offer. And then she was also discovered, plotting another. Then she was sent away. She was imprisoned, of course. All right. And then this was the time when actually, Menelik got a chance, to marry Ait,
Mm.
right? Who was there in
There's no
Shaw.
history. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And therefore, what sort of person was I?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Titu was a very, very strong person, well educated, and a very, very good wife to Menelik, loyal to Menelik. All right? And actually, uh, she also traces actually her ancestry to uh, Susnios. Well, I wonder if you know this Susnios, the times of Susnios. Now,
What's
this was,
that?
yeah, Susnius, who attempted, conversion to Catholicism.
Catholicism.
Yeah, to Catholicism. And because of that, he was actually forced to abdicate, all right, his
Mm-hmm.
power in favor of his son, of course, Fasilides. The time of the building of the city of Gondar as a city, that was in 1636,
Mm-hmm.
uh, because the father had to abdicate. Now, try to actually traces her origin, to Sufis. On the other hand, Menelik also traces his ancestry to um, uh, uh, Livna Dingle. You remember Livna Dingle?
Oh,
Now, this was the king who
13.
had to fight against Ahmed Grai in the Battle of Shimbrakure,
Mm-hmm.
right? We lost the
Yeah.
battle, of course, and Ahmed Grai took over, power. And finally, Livnaringa himself died in 1540, 39, 40, and was succeeded by his son Claudius. Now, this is therefore Menelik traces, his ancestor, too.
And
Therefore, both of them are actually within the ruling family. Yeah. Anyway, therefore, Aitu came to power, and she was very strong politically. She participated in all affairs, especially politics. Had it not been for Aitu, even the success in the Battle of Adwa was actually, well, I imagine. I can say this. Why? Because she was the one actually who had to, encourage Menelik himself, and sometimes, directly involved in decision making,
mm-hmm.
right, and taking action. Menelik at one point allowed the Italians actually to withdraw from Mekelle.
Yeah.
When he could actually easily take them prisoners. He allowed them actually, to leave. Not only that, he even uh, supplied them with, pack animals, all right, to transport,
Go
their
back.
their
Yeah.
their goods, from to Adigrat.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, Rasmussen was given actually, mm, the option to do this. But Taitu had strongly opposed to this idea of supporting the enemy, while actually they were ready to fight against.
Mm-hmm.
No, she was such a personality, very strong politically, and not only that, mostly the peaceful relations we have with Menelik and the regional chiefs was mainly arranged by Taitu, who had somehow, arranged, marriage alliances with chiefs, in all areas. All right? Marriage alliances, including Ras Mekonnel and Nugus Walter Georgis of Gondar. She managed actually, to organize this and establish peace. All right?
Yeah.
That is it. Therefore, she was bold, all right, could confront, any problem, without retreat, and she was daring as a matter of fact. All right. What she told, Antonelli, I am a woman, you are a man, and as a woman, I'm not supposed actually to go to the battle. But when it comes to defending, the state of Ethiopia, you will see. All right? And therefore, let us meet in the battlefield. That's actually what she said.
Yeah.
And therefore, Taitu was a very strong personality who had to be, on the side of Menelik. All right? And actually, I can say, a support in his success. Right? We should support him. That was it. But when we consider, the side of Menelik, now we are coming to mobilization and going to the Battle of Adwa. All right. How did Menelik manage actually, to muster such a huge force? About 108,600, right? Fighting force to follow him to the battlefield. Mangasha came, told him that, he had done something wrong in making agreement with the Italians that, Zamboa would be, the line between the Italian-controlled territory and, the rest of the country. Now, Alula and Mangasha came to show when Menelik learned about, this situation. Now, he simply told Mangasha to go back and that we will be coming. And then Menelik ordered mobilization of the forces. All right? He told, the Ethiopians actually that he is going to battle, fight against, a foreign enemy, and asked, the Ethiopians to follow him. That he will be in the forefront, and therefore follow him. And therefore, forces are to mobilize, from all over Ethiopia. Now we have forces from different regions, all right, from different areas. We have Tekle Haymanot of Gojam, Tekle Haymanot of Gojam, and Ras Mekonnel, of course, the ruler of Harar, leading the forces of Harar, and Mangasha in Tigray, and Ras Alula again in Tigray.
I think our guest has frozen. How about we take a very quick break until he comes back? We'll go ahead and fix his camera and we'll continue this conversation. Thank you for your patience and we'll be right back.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጭባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምቢኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
Okay, thank you everyone for being with us. We have our guest back again. His camera was frozen for a few seconds. We have him back. Professor, you could go ahead. You were telling us the different regions in which the Ethiopian army has accumulated from.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was telling you about the forces from different regions, from Gojam, from Harar, from Walaga areas, and from Tigray itself. Actually, there you have Mangesha, Ras Mikael of Wollo, and Wakshum Gobezi from Gwangul, from Lasta areas. And then we have Pitaurari Gaveyo from Shawa itself and Balchas Haf. All right. Now, those were actually on the fourth one in the Vanguard force. And then
Where was Balchas?
Balchas Safo. This is from the Gurage areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, they were within the force of Milikins. Yeah. And mostly on the side of Aitu. We hear about her, having commands there. And then Mahal Safari. This is a special force, a sort of Ethiopian army, independent from the regional chiefs. All right, it's actually a kind of a start of the army of Ethiopia. All right. Otherwise, each regional chief used to have its own forces in all regions. All right, and therefore when Rasmussen comes from Harar, he comes with all his forces from the Harar region, and Wollo the same, because those races were commanders in chief, or they were generals, you can say, nowadays, all right, understanding, all right, and therefore we have all these forces coming, and well, it was a very short period. Within a short period, Menelik could mobilize a huge army of 108,600, right, fighting force, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is
Do we have a timeline as to how short of a time that took?
Well, the battle, the time actually is
The
not more
mobilization of the army.
than a month. Actually, all those people have to travel, on foot, mind you.
Yeah.
We do not have cars, we do not have planes now, as we do nowadays. Everybody has to travel on foot, all right?
Yeah.
And supplies or all actually, by individual and individual care. And therefore, the only thing is actually, to be there, all right, on his own, as having responsibility to defend the state, all right?
Yeah.
And therefore, so it became actually everybody's responsibility. Now the people understood because of the policies of Menelik, all right,
Yeah.
his approach towards the people, and he was the most liked, all right, person, most liked person, all right. If someone have to say Menelik Himut, everything is actually not there,
Done.
all right.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that is actually why most Ethiopians understood him as Emir. No, just like a mother, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I think, whenever we talk about like the mobilization of the army, for me, it's not just a sacrifice that they made, to life, right? It's a fact that I can't imagine even like walking from Addis Ababa all the way to Adwa, right? Like that's walking. And let alone walking from like cities and regions way deeper down from, from Addis Ababa, like from Harar and I'm blanking on other names, but like from areas like Awasa and such, and how long that would take, right? That sacrifice, even carrying all the food and making sure that everybody was taken care of at the same time. And just thinking, like, we have this thing where, like, you have to do 10,000 walks a day. That's barely 2 miles. And that seems so much for us right now. And just thinking about, like, how many miles a day does it have to walk to make it to Adwa? And how long of a walk was that to say, I'm going to defend this land, even though I probably have never seen it, even though the people that live around there don't speak the language that I speak, but this is our land and we're going to defend it. And to have that kind of, like, dedication to Ethiopia is just really beautiful to me to understand.
Yeah, actually, working on food, sacrificing, one's own interest.
Yeah.
Right? Defending the state, defending, the dignity of its ancestors, not only that. Ethiopia is a country actually which survived there for thousands of years, through the sacrifices made by, the ancestors. And each and every person in Ethiopia knows actually what Ethiopia means for them. All right?
Yeah.
Therefore, they have the love of the country, the life of the leader. All right? And everybody takes it, as individual responsibility. All right? You don't have to wait for another person to tell you about this. When it comes to when it comes to considering, the state of Ethiopia, all right, you sacrifice. There is no actually, retreating or going back. All right?
Yeah.
Then not agreeing with it. All right. Yeah, that is it.
For sure.
That is it. And therefore, actually, it did not take, a long time, to mobilize all forces. Menelik made his, first stand or joining point in Warail, in Wallo.
Okay.
That was actually his first capital before he moved to Antoto, Warail. And then from there, you have to, move forward, all right, from there to northward to Amba, where actually we had, the first incident against the Italians. There we have Fitaurari Gabeyo, who was not well actually at the time. He was just, staying in his tent, and somehow he was just, moving around and just monitoring. And he discovered, the Italians camped, very nearby. You know what he did? He did not even report, to his superiors. He simply took action and he devastated the Italians and reported immediately. Yeah. You know what happened? When Ras Mokonnen and all the other, 6 officers listened about this, Gabeyo was imprisoned and reported that, he took action without informing and yeah, informing his superiors. You know how Menelik responded? Just release him because he didn't know what's right.
Yeah.
Therefore, yeah. Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. That's what.
Truly.
Yeah.
As we're having this conversation, I'm truly grasping why we know Menelik as a Menelik, right? His compassion and his decisiveness on his decisions and on his relations with people as well is really, really quite beautiful. But yeah, go ahead. Apologies for cutting you off.
Yeah. That's it. And therefore, then another stand seems to be in Mekelle, where the Italians are already lagging. They have their own camp, and therefore, first they have to deal with this, right? Therefore, it was Aitu who played, the decisive role. She devised actually a system, all right, to, first the Italians, all right, control the water supply, and then forced the Italians actually, to withdraw. It was Aitu's role. Yeah, it was Aitu's role. Now that was her method, all right, without firing, single shot. The Italians have to evacuate, Mecca. Now we see this, and then finally, they came to Adwa. Well, the battle took place for not more than actually, real battle, not more than 4 hours. It started early. Yeah, it started early in the morning, and the Italians thought, they could lead, surprise attack. And Menelik and his forces were actually, on guard, all right? And at night, they got information the Italians were actually coming. It was Ras Mengesha and then Ras Mukonnen. Then the battle started. Within hours, the Italians were finished. And they were on the run. Most of them were killed, right? And captured, taken prisoners, right? And I think Italians learned a lesson. It's not only this. And now, when we consider the Battle of Gundati and Gura, we read from the reports of a certain day, the American, all right, journalist who was watching, the Battle of Gundati and Gura, that Ethiopians' fighting habit was so terrible, all right, right? And in this incident, I think the Ethiopians have demonstrated, all right, their power. Yeah, yeah. Within hours, the battle was over.
Wow.
Yeah.
I knew, when we talk, I never came across that it only took 4 hours. So that's quite surprising to me. But Professor, what was the church's role as far as the Battle of Adwa and the preparation to it goes?
Well, the church, I say, is the psychological base. All right? Psychological base, because it encouraged Ethiopians actually to maintain and keep their independence. Yeah. Are you listening?
I am here.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Psychological base. They encouraged actually, to defend oneself, defend the country, defend the religion, all right, is the most important and main thing actually for a state to do. Okay, as one nation, all right.
Yeah.
People can have, their faith, different faith. It was not a problem, all right. But the church lays down this psychological, framework there, to defend a common interest, all right, to defend the state, all right, and see the difference between what is an enemy and what is actually a friend. Therefore, Italians were coming there, all right, as enemy. Actually, in Menelik's, all right, uh, uh, mobilization, all right, he had stated that an enemy is coming, all right, to deny the right of the people, to deny the people's, or destroy the religion, destroy the worship, and take over the rights of the people and the freedom of the people. And therefore, I'm going to battle, right, to defend. Therefore, follow me. Now, this was actually, actually what we learned from, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It's going to battle, not actually to take arms and fight, but protect and support the moral and the psychology of the fighters. All right?
Yeah.
Moral and psychology of the fighters. And therefore, that's why we say it's the ideological base. And the independence and the freedom of the state is maintained for such a long period.
Yeah.
All right, for tens of years. Because it has, the backing of the church.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the painting that we were just showing was something that was painted by Zamari Yilma, and it really truly shows like the diversity of people at this war, and also the center, the church at the center of it as well, because they brought in the tablet and the fathers were there worshiping and encouraging, like you said, during that time, right? So that really shows that unity that you were just mentioning, that was encouraged at this battle, and is really making it a truly Ethiopian experience. That idea of like defending what is ours and defending the rights to worship and defending to exist independently and free. That was very much innate in our forefathers' mind and heart, which I think this drawing really captures.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You are right. You are right. I think the painting has properly, depicted, those factors. I can see
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So was there a specific strategy as to when we come to the day, right, March 1st, the Battle of Adwa, even though it took 4 hours, was there a specific strategy that Minilik was using to win this battle?
Yeah. Strategy. Actually, uh, first of all, not to start the war or confront the war until the enemy comes, to the open.
Mm,
All right.
yeah.
Now, and he was waiting for them. I will not go and attack them until the enemy comes forward.
Mhm.
You know what? The Italians were well armed. All right, they have better weapons, they have better training, and they are in a very strong position. All right,
Yeah.
meaning technologically. But the Ethiopians were using actually their moral force. All right, which has been inherited through generations,
Yeah.
and therefore going forward in this battle, all right, and throwing oneself in danger is not advisable. Therefore, just watch. And Menelik was so patient. He had to wait for the Italians until they started the war. All right, all right. And at one moment there was a rumor actually going around that Menelik had decided actually to turn back home and come back to fight this battle sometime next year. Now this is just a rumor going around.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what happened? This news is said to have reached a certain person, all right, who was now under the Rasta Sama,
Yeah.
right? Within with Rasta Sama's forces, and he was, a very very bold person to tell Rasta Sama that he had some secret to tell Menelik.
Mm.
Okay, Rasta Sama asked him, "What? Why don't you tell me? I will tell this, to Menelik." No, this is a personal matter. I want to talk to Menelik himself. Tell him actually, what to do about this part. Then Rasta Sama arranged, for the meeting, took the person to Menelik, and he asked Menelik about, what is really going on. You're so patient. We have to travel such a long distance coming, from distant places here, traveling for days. And now we hear a rumor going around that Menelik is going back home, no? Without fighting. And then, what is that, you want to tell me? Just tell me. All right? That's actually Menelik asking. You know what? Traditionally, you know what we do? Before we go for a very important incident, all right?
Yeah.
Traditionally, we slaughter animals and then we examine the entrails of the animal.
Mm.
And there we read actually what will be, the event, all right, from the entrails.
Yeah.
I did that before I left home, before I came to the battle, all right? If we start this battle, if we fight this battle, all right,
Yeah.
really we are going to win.
Mm.
We will win. There is no problem about this. And then, okay, is that what you tell me? Yes. You know what he told him? It's not
Yeah.
only we, the male people, came here. We brought, our wives, the women also, and everybody is here. Is it not shame for us actually to go back without fighting, without, Now this enemy, look, they are grazing, their animals, their donkeys, their horses, and their mules outside there. All right, and therefore we have to do something. Okay, it was the night just before the start of the battle. All right, and then early in the morning, all right, the battle started, and at the end of the day, all right, many came back, all right, to his tent, all right, and asked the Rasta Sama, please try to find that person who came and talked to me yesterday. All right, if he is not dead, just bring him here. You know what? That person was found. He was not dead. He was a very good fighter. All right, he has been fighting all day, and Menelik told him that you have to stay with all time without. You know who this person is? You know who he is? You don't know. Now that was Farihat Georgis, who actually became, the Minister of War in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, Menelik has this character of listening to people. He's so patient. All right, takes time.
Yeah.
All right. Now this is, the type of leadership that we have. All right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing. I know when we were preparing for this conversation, we knew that there was so much to talk about, so much to cover, but we didn't have as much time. So I just want to remind our viewers that this is just the beginning of the conversation here on Adwa Media. We're going to continue this conversation this whole week about Adwa and the victory and everything else we can know and learn. We may not be able to cover everything, but we'll cover as much as possible. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot as well. So starting from tomorrow in the Amharic program, this is a conversation that will continue. Gashi, before we wrap up here, could you tell us what the impact of this war was, or this victory was, for Ethiopia, especially what happened in Ethiopia, what changed after this victory?
Okay. Now, what can we say about different groups of people? Now let us just consider it that way. What about for Europe? All right, surprise for the Europeans. They never expected. All right, any local community could defend its territory and defeat an enemy or uniform, which is Syrian. That was a big surprise.
Yeah.
A big surprise for Europe. They never expected that Ethiopia would win, this battle. Right? That's one. All right. The other thing is, Ethiopia's sovereignty was recognized from this time. Europeans admitted that Ethiopia is potentially strong to defend itself. All right.
Yeah.
Not only that, we learn from this. The rest of Africa, the rest of the African community. All right. And particularly those people who set up, the Pan-African movement, took this as an example.
Yeah.
All right, Pan-African movement started in the US and then moved to Europe and finally to Africa.
Yeah.
All right, and actually it was a movement for all Black people, all right, colonized communities. And therefore, Ethiopia had played, an exemplary role for those people. All right, it was, yeah. Just created some hope, for the suppressed groups of people. All right,
Yeah.
And for Ethiopia, Ethiopia was accepted as equal footing with the rest of Europe, and therefore Ethiopia started playing, its role, right, as defender of human rights. Ethiopia was the first country, beginning from this time on, when, at the end of the First World War, when the League of Nations was established, Ethiopia was there as, founder of the League of Nations. Even at the end of the Second World War, when the UN was established, Ethiopia was there. All right?
Yeah.
Now, you see, the effect, this is the effect that you have.
Absolutely.
And yeah, the other thing is Europeans accepted Ethiopia as an ally from this time and set up, their embassies in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, now the relationship between Ethiopia and the Europeans is
Yeah.
right? This long history of modern diplomacy, and without actually going back, to what was going on in the past, Ethiopia,
Mhm.
past Ethiopia. But beginning from this time on, we are moving into more modern period, and that is another very important establishing diplomacy. The other thing is, Menelik started focusing on educating young Ethiopians. All right,
Yeah.
focused on education and opened actually the Menelik First School. Now, actually, the school started in the palace itself, and then later on moved just outside the palace. If you know Arat Kilo, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's outside there. There is a garage. That was actually where we had, the school. Immediately after, the palace moved out of the palace, and finally, the Menelik Secondary School was opened. And therefore, even though Theodros and Johannes have attempted actually to send Ethiopians abroad for education, Menelik established modern education in Ethiopia itself. This is another very important, and we know the effect of education,
Yeah.
all right, in nowadays, because we all got the chance actually to open our eyes and look actually what's going on around the world, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we have become actually part of the world community because we had this opportunity through education. That's what we say, right?
Yeah.
We learn more about the world, and the world is learning more about us. All right. Huh?
Yeah.
Ethiopia is one of the ancient countries in the world, in Africa, ancient countries.
Yeah.
All right, not conquered by any force, by any power. The attempt by Italy not only once, two times. All right,
Yeah.
Ethiopians had gone and defended their their freedom, their independence.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's what Ethiopia is.
Yeah.
All right, and we are proud of this. The Ethiopians should feel proud of this. All right, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I think they definitely afforded us because, especially sitting in diaspora, right? When we are asked about what Ethiopia is or who we are as Ethiopians, we proudly say we are a country that were never colonized, right? That's a very unique position
Yeah,
that our ancestors had paid with blood and sweat for sure. And I think sometimes I want you to comment on this as well. Right now, the way things are in Ethiopia, especially politically, there's that sense of wanting to distance ourselves from this victory, from Minilik and from the Tegit Aitu and all the heroes that protected and defended Ethiopia and what it means to be Ethiopia, and definitely gave us a freedom to sit around, right, and pass judgments on their decisions and such, right? We would have never had that opportunity if they hadn't actually defended us, defended what we are now taking for granted. So how do we move forward? How do we look at that? How do we look at the sacrifices that were made for us and all the work that they have put together to really give us a country that is united, give us a country that knows who it is and who we are, even the people that of that generation seems to know who they are as Ethiopians in a more concrete, sensible way than we do right now. So what is your advice for the youth? And even, maybe the youth is not the only one having that identity crisis. How do we take this victory and really understand who we are as Ethiopians and move forward away from this hatred and hateful rhetoric that we are living through right now?
well, the youth have to learn that they have um, in the first place, a very proud country. Now it starts there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We are not ashamed actually of what we have done, what our ancestors have done. They have defended their soul, right? The force will try to right. No, it's pride. All right. side. And therefore, they have paid in and
Professor, we're having a bit of an issue with your audio. Could you start over? I think, okay, now we're clearing up. Go ahead and start over. Apologies.
Is it okay? Is it okay?
It's good now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I don't know what's going on. Yeah. You know, the young generation must learn more about what was in the past. All right?
Yeah.
This generation was an extension of the past. All right? It has a lot to learn from its, ancestry, from its past history. All right? How did this country have to be? All right? What were the problems confronted? And we learned that the whole of Africa had been colonized. How did Ethiopia manage, its independence? Egypt was the most powerful, but it was colonized by the Ottoman Turks, colonized by the Europeans. It does not mean that the Ottoman Turks and the Europeans did not attempt to colonize Africa or Ethiopia. They have attempted, all right? And they were successful everywhere, except in Ethiopia. Why? Because the Ethiopians' determination to safeguard, their independence, all right? Safeguard their independence, and they have sacrificed, to maintain this. They have done a lot of sacrifice, all right?
Yeah.
As we say, traveling long distances did not hinder them actually from defending, their state. They were always there whenever there are problems. They might have some internal differences, but that doesn't matter when it comes to, all right, a very important issue like, defending, one's state, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, the young generation has to learn from its history, right? History is very important because it establishes a link between the past, the present, and the future. All right? What's going to happen in the future if we don't know actually what happened in the past? And how did it happen to be here? Right? Free, independent nation. All right? All right? Therefore, the most important thing is to consider and reconsider, all right, of our past, present, and plan what will happen in the future. Everything is at our disposal, in our own hands. We can plan it, we can arrange it, come together, discuss it among ourselves. All right, and therefore we must have this idea of open-mindedness, right? Open-mindedness, accepting ideas from all directions. That would help because we can learn, right, from our friends, from other people, and we have to consider where the world is leading us, right? So, and then we must aim actually to that because we want to travel with the rest of the world, not remaining behind, right? Therefore, that will be probably the most important, responsibility of the young generation. All right, inheriting, all right, a state like Ethiopia is not an easy matter, and therefore maintaining, this freedom of the state, integrity of the state, well-being of the state, development of the state is actually in the hands of the young generation. All right, we have all new modern technology. All right, it is up to the young generation to learn more about this. All right, science, all right, are developing. And therefore, why not go into different areas? All right, there is a lot to learn. Therefore, this is actually what I would advise. All right, I would advise this. All right, there is a lot to learn. All right, we have a beautiful country, a beautiful history. All right, and a great generation. Our ancestors have actually sacrificed to give us this. All right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. That's really beautiful. On my end, I'm done with my questions. I have so many, but we're limited by time. So we've asked at the beginning of this conversation that we'll take one or two questions from our guests. So I see one question from Salamawit GK. I'll read it out loud for you, Professor. It said, "How did the Adwa victory and the battle affect the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea? Isn't the issue we do have with Eritreans and led to the Eritrean independence?"
Well, I think the Eritreans uh, should also learn. All right? It doesn't affect much. It doesn't affect much. Why? Because that problem I thought was redressed the times of, all right, Haile Selassie,
Yeah.
but wrongly understood. All right? Ethiopia and Eritrea were united. They became United States, all right, as one state, like in the past. But somehow it was the colonial powers' interpretation, all right,
Yeah.
which drove a wedge between, right, Ethiopia and Eritrea. And the understanding of the young Eritreans, I think, has to be, uh, uh, mm, more, more, right, understanding, more flexible, all right. Well, we've lived as a state, as community, as neighbors, all right, loving each other, all right, for generations. Our history, Ethiopian history, started actually in Eritrea itself. This is actually where we have the origin, all right. How did we have this difference between Ethiopia and Eritrea? It was a foreign colonial problem, colonization problem. It was not actually Minilik or the Battle of Adwa, uh, uh, for this. It was not that, all right? Minilik had done his best actually to defend. And then the latter generation somehow had managed actually to reintegrate Eritrea into Ethiopia, all right?
Yeah.
Still, foreign colonial powers did not like this. They were encouraging secessionist forces, actually, one way or the other, all right, to take another route. Otherwise, Ethiopia did not feel that Eritrea is different from Ethiopia, from the rest of the Ethiopians. That's the attitude we have. That's the feeling we have. And therefore, history also tells us that we don't see much difference between the two. We don't see much difference. And therefore, what harms Eritrea harms also Ethiopia. And what harms Ethiopia also will have some sense of feeling in Eritrea, among the Eritreans. Culturally, we are the same. We speak more or less, the same language. All right?
Yeah.
We have more or less, similar feelings. All right? We don't see much difference, except, this foreign intervention and leading a wedge between us. All right? Encouraging, some groups actually, to secede. And they talk about, freedom. What is freedom after all? What is freedom? All right? Colonization. Ethiopia as a colonized. No. Ethiopian territory was amputated from Ethiopia. By what? By the colonial force. Italy had never been there. All right? Until the 18th century. Italians were not there until the 18th century. But it was the colonial making, all right, which brought in Italy all right, and amputated or cut off the Ethiopian territory, created their own state, gave it the name Eritrea. It was Bahar Nagash in Ethiopian context, and then they called it Eritrea, make it different or separate, and therefore we hope the Eritreans and the Ethiopians would sit together, all right, solve their differences, all right, and re-establish actually what was in the past. I hope they will do this, all right. I hope they will do this. It's the future actually to decide to determine on this, all right. We have well-educated Eritreans who know what is Ethiopia and what is Eritrea, and the harm actually done with this separation, all right. It's more problem. I don't know how much the separation can encourage and satisfy the people. No, right? Closeness and coming together is actually what I would advise. Right? The Battle of Adwa, and when we consider this in relation to the Eritrean situation, I have mentioned certain points there. All right. Somehow the Italians have legitimized actually their stay there. Somehow. And that was actually a matter of power and force. If Menelik had actually continued in the battle, do you think all the other European powers would simply sit down and wait? All right. You know what happened in the Second Italian-Ethiopian War? Ethiopia actually attempted, to buy weapons to defend itself, but she was denied. Ethiopia was denied. All right. Ethiopia was denied. And who was denying that? The colonial forces, the colonial powers, who were encouraging actually, the dismantling of the Ethiopian state. Yeah. No, we cannot, very Ethio-Somali conflict, all right? That was during, the Derg regime, all right? You know what happened, all right? Claims and counterclaims, all right, of territories, of regions, right? This is actually what we call the colonial method, all right? The colonial method. Now we have to be very careful. Still, whenever there are problems in Ethiopia and in Africa, they always consider that, right? Because of the colonial situation in Ethiopia and in Eritrea, whenever there are issues, they refer this to the Italians. The same to other African countries. The colonial power seems to be responsible.
Yeah.
All right? Yeah, responsible. But they should know that Ethiopia is an independent state. Even in the 5 years of Italian attempted to colonize Ethiopia, Ethiopia had continued the battle. They have been fighting all the way through the 5 years. All right? They did not give a chance for the Italians actually to move out of the urban centers. They were limited only in the urban centers, whereas the rural areas were in the hands of the freedom fighters. Yeah. At the time when Balai Zalek, he had organized 40,000 fighters. No, by the time when the Italians left, you have Ras Ras Amora over there in Gonda, right? And another one, Garasotuki, all right, in Shawan areas, and Ras Abeba Aragai. Maybe you know about this person who organized forces in the region, northern Marabit area, and then the other territories. And therefore, actually, to occupy and colonize Africa was limited only to the urban centers, not the rest of the country. All right. Therefore, it was, I say, a change of tactic. Let the enemy, okay, coming, and then the battle continues.
Yeah.
No, that was actually what the World Council did. Ras Muru Haile Selassie was to serve as the commander of this resistance force and resistance in all of the regions, and that had been going on, for the period of the 5 years. Ethiopians did not give in. Actually, they did not give in. Yeah.
It's
We
definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's when we're talking about Ethiopian history, it's something that Ethiopia is a country that people have paid for, and this is something that we see in every era, from its inception until today. And we are a proud people because we have every reason to be, and because our ancestors have given us that right to be proud and to live independently, to think independently, to have our own faith, to be able to develop our own writing, and everything that makes Ethiopia Ethiopia. So I'm very thankful as an Ethiopian. I'm very thankful and really humbled every time I learn what people have done for me, how much they have sacrificed for me. So thank you so much again, Professor, for being here with us. But so many of our guests are asking for you to, if it is at all possible, like I said, we have this whole week reserved to talk about Adwa. And so if you have time at all, I want to take your promise here, if you could be on one of our Amarinya program this week.
Well, no problem. But you will tell me in advance when that will happen. I'm always there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll
Yeah,
definitely
as
reach
long as
out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you have any last words, I'll give you the floor and we'll wrap up.
Well, I say thank you. I say thank you for the chance that you gave me. I'm really happy actually to share, the very little that I have, right? As long as, it is doing, any good, all right, to the public, to the society, to the Ethiopians, all right? I'm really happy. I am always willing really to cooperate and be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you're definitely a treasure that we have. I know you've taught me so much about Ethiopian history, and even today, right, I'm starting to grasp why we call Minilik Minilik, and why Etegit Aitu is also called the light of Ethiopia, right? For us to be able to learn those things is very, very powerful, especially as we're discovering who we are and figure out where we stand in history, and also figure out where we come from. Like I said, we'll go ahead and link the professor's press conversation with Cassis Ephraim right in the description of this link once we are out of the live conversation. And as he promised, he'll definitely be one of our guests this week as we continue to explore what happened in Adwa and the road leading to Adwa as we commemorate and celebrate this victory as well. And for those of you that joined us, thank you so much. And please go ahead and share this to your family and friends as well, so other people could learn a bit or as much as we have learned. Until next week, I'll see you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን አምብኝ ብለው የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎ ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔም ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የሁላችንም ነው።
የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ?
Do your parents watch Adebabay media?
Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ